So this episode is going to focus mostly on the emptiness of elections and I guess talking a little bit about the federal election to begin with, and specifically how meaningless it was to have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announce an election only to have the same result, but also to really have a lot of examples of how electing these people to represent us and to go into these positions of power and really do almost nothing but perform action while still, coming back to us year after year and, demanding us to vote and demanding us to still participate in this system meaningfully, like it's actually going to, affect our lives, or like it's actually going to change anything meaningfully in our lives. It really strikes the emptiness of everything. And I think that's something that was like really, really on display in this last federal election. So we talked a lot about, I guess, bad news coverage and different things like that in the media. But I think a good example of like a really good news article, or at least like a good piece of media that came out of this election, was written by a former host of this show, actually, Hanan. And it was written in Passage, which is a left-wing Canadian media publication. And the headline is "Trudeau Can't Claim to Care About Muslims Until He Fights Bill 21. So Bill 21 is a bill in Quebec that essentially is trying to prevent anyone from wearing any religious symbols if they work in public office. So if they work for any level of government or any other public service in Quebec. So clearly targeting people who choose to wear the hijab, which is a core part of, practicing the faith. If you're Muslim, some Muslims choose not to wear it, but some do, obviously. So after 4 people were killed in Ontario due to Islamophobia and hate-based violence, every federal leader came out and basically said, we stand with Muslims, we understand the hate that they receive. Really strong words from every leader, standing in solidarity. But then when it came to actually questioning their support for Bill 21, it's been silence from basically everyone. So circling back, it's the same thing when I talk about meaninglessness. Hanan put it perfectly in this article, where we're getting the performance, we're getting the rhetoric, we're getting all the words that, sound really nice. We're getting the system, asking us to vote and, participate, but we're not getting the action. We're not getting what, people need to actually, make their lives livable in the system that we have right now. So I think it's important, to understand these situations that, kind of reveal what's going on underneath the system and show, how we can actually push things to maybe be different. And I think one of the ways that this can happen is understanding that, politicians shouldn't be given a blank slate. Every time there's an election, or every time, some new cycle or some new issue happens, it seems like you're almost being reintroduced to like the same people that were in positions where they could have actually done something, but chose, for whatever reason, oftentimes because it's inconvenient for their own power or for, their own interests, to not do anything. So we have this past federal election, Randy Boissonnault, who's a Liberal member of Parliament, elected into office after he lost his seat. But when he was in power, he was part of the questioning of Jody Wilson-Raybould, an Indigenous MP who questioned Justin Trudeau and criticized his government for abuse of power. So it's interesting to see how the narrative is changed, and how, like I said, these people, politicians, get a blank slate, and we conveniently forget about their roles in suppressing Indigenous issues, or suppressing an Indigenous person who is challenging the status quo, and how things are just kind of kept rolling the same way. The liberal government that's in power right now, I think, is a really good example of what we talk about when we say performative politics. And they came in with promises that I think co-opted a lot of the things that people really want to see change. So, for example, electoral reform, I think things that were significant in Indigenous rights issues, like missing and murdered Indigenous women, among other things. So the government comes in promising all these different things. And of course, because it was all a performance to begin with, when someone like Jody Wilson-Raybould, for example, challenges the status quo, asks them to live up to their actual promises and what they actually stand for, Jody got shut down, got removed from her position in cabinet, got essentially ostracized and kicked out of her party, and is no longer in a position where she's actually taking advantage of being able to challenge the status quo in a meaningful way. So I think this is kind of encapsulated perfectly, at least like the position of different groups in Canada in this chapter in this book, Indigenous Rights, by an Edmonton author, or I guess a local Alberta author, Chelsea Vowell. So Indigenous Rights is a guide to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit issues in Canada. And Chelsea Vowell is a professor at the University of Alberta, as well as a public speaker, intellectual, and writer. And I'm just going to read this chapter. And I think, like I said, it encapsulates some of the ideas that I've been talking about earlier. For thousands of generations before contact, diversity of culture was a fact in what is now known as Canada. Despite today's official policy of multiculturalism, Canada was nonetheless collapsed cultural diversity into essentially four categories: white Anglophone settlers, white Francophone settlers, Aboriginal people, and newcomers, which basically is everyone else and is, in my opinion, the more honest term. None of these categories is neat or even particularly coherent when examined at all closely. For example, Black families who have lived in Canada as long as any of their white counterparts are still often categorized as newcomers. And the existence of slavery as a reason for Black presence in Canada is thoroughly denied. The incredible diversity of Aboriginal peoples is ignored in favor of a one-size-fits-all federal policy. The meaning of white has shifted and changed over time as European settlers expanded the category through official immigration policies, and so has meant very different things at different times in Canadian history. Despite the flaws inherent in these categories, there is still a strong sense that Aboriginal culture was supplanted by white settler culture, and newcomer everyone else cultures are welcomed only to the extent that they enrich the Canadian experience. In other words, as long as they are expressed via costumes, food, and music. Obviously, I'm simplifying what are very complex series of relationships and social phenomena, all to state what is fairly obvious. Canada has a set of relatively new cultural norms that are settler-based, and these cultural norms constitute the mainstream. In Canada, there are strong ideas about how to act, which do not always mirror Indigenous expectations. Cultural expression that can be commodified as a part of that mainstream, providing a very narrow outlet for Indigenous and everyone else, particularly Black and non-Black POC cultural expression. Cultural expression that can be purchased in the form of goods and services or entertainment are acceptable. Cultural expressions that cannot be so easily commodified can be seen as threatening, transgressive, or simply not Canadian. So, if you could get the kind of message through my reading, I think this chapter by Chelsea Vowell really goes to this kind of difference where, there's the acceptable and there's the unacceptable in Canada. There's the acceptable liberal performance of, saying that you stand with Black lives and Indigenous people and for electoral reform and for, balancing things in favor of, workers. And then there's the unacceptable, which is, challenging the status quo, like Jody Wilson-Raybould, making sure that people are held accountable for their promises. This is kind of seen in the cultural view with what Chelsea Val is writing, but I think it applies to a lot of the political action that's taking place in Canada today.